Clara was 26 years old and worked the night shift at a call center downtown. Her world was made of screens, cold lights, and voices coming from all corners of the country. She was good at her job, calm, attentive, always with a cup of lukewarm coffee by her side. But that Tuesday felt different. It was raining outside. Heavy drops drummed against the windows like impatient fingers trying to get in. The digital clock read 2:46 a.m. when line 08 lit up. Clara answered automatically. "Good early morning, this is Clara. How can I help you?" No response. Only static, faint, almost like a trapped breath. She frowned. "Hello? Sir or ma'am? Can you hear me?" Then came the sounds. Distant sirens. Muffled screams. Cracks. A dry noise, like wood splitting. Clara pulled the headset away from her ear, her heart racing. But when she checked the system, the number of the call was disconnected. That shouldn't have been possible. Before she could react, the world around her changed. The floor trembled. The lights flickered. She was no longer there. The vision was vivid, too real, flames rising through the building's hallways. Screams echoing through the emergency stairs. Smoke filling the floors like an invisible monster. Clara saw her coworkers running, coughing, pounding on locked doors. The fire moved as if it had a will of its own. When she tried to move, she realized she was trapped too. The walls were melting. The heat burned her skin. Someone on the other side of the room was shouting her name, but the sound came as if from underwater. And then, silence. A snap. Back in her chair, Clara gasped, drenched in sweat. The headset slipped from her hand. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. She stood up, trembling, and looked around. The whole floor carried on as usual, phone calls, typing, mechanical sounds. But something inside her said it wasn't just a vision. Without thinking, she ran to the emergency panel and pulled the fire alarm. Real siren. Confusion. Evacuation. And minutes later, everyone was outside, under the rain, watching as an electrical failure in the building system caused a short circuit. There was no fire, yet. But smoke was rising from the basement. The threat had been real. Clara saved everyone. But as she turned around, she saw something in the ambulance's side mirror, where a nervous employee was being treated. For a second. Just one, her reflection wasn't there. The rain hadn't stopped. It was light now, but persistent, as if slowly washing away the trace of something about to begin. Clara stood still in front of the ambulance, her heart still racing. Her reflection had vanished for a moment. Nothing more. A trick of the light, maybe. A distortion caused by water on the glass. But it wasn't just that. She knew it wasn't. "Miss, are you feeling okay?" asked the paramedic, gently touching her shoulder. Clara nodded without answering. Around her, her coworkers spoke loudly, agitated. The building had been successfully evacuated. The electrical panel in the basement did show signs of overheating, and if someone hadn't pulled the alarm in time, the heat buildup could have caused a real fire in just a few minutes. She had saved lives. Everyone was saying that. But not everyone believed her version of the story. The next day, Clara was called to the administrative office. The meeting room was cold and overly lit. Seated at the table were the head of security, the night shift manager, and an HR representative. "Clara, first we want to thank you for your quick action," said the manager in a dark suit. "The technician confirmed the issue with the electrical center. But we need to understand why you pulled the alarm without any concrete evidence at the time." Clara hesitated. What could she say? "I had a vision. I heard a call from a dead number." She knew how that would sound. "I smelled something burning. That's why I acted," she lied, her voice trembling. The HR woman wrote something down without looking up. "We're just asking for caution. You understand, right? The cost of evacuation wasn't insignificant." Clara left the room feeling smaller. Less real. As if she could disappear at any moment, like in the mirror. In the company's cafeteria, she ran into Leo, one of the overnight operators. He was 30, wore large glasses, and had a dry sense of humor that usually made long nights more bearable. "Looks like you're a hero now," he joked while stirring his coffee. "I didn't want the attention. I just did what I thought was right." "Was the building going to catch fire or not?" he asked, looking straight at her. "It was." He was silent for a moment, then shrugged. "Then you did the right thing." Other co-workers gathered around. Toddy, 24, Q supervisor, Vinicius, 29, IT technician. And Melissa, 35, a data analyst who rarely spoke. They had all escaped with Clara that night. All still alive. For now. 3 days later, the news broke. Electrical panel showed critical fire risk, reads technical report. Employee prevents tragedy by pulling alarm seconds before system failure. Footage from security cameras showed the moment Clara ran to the panel. The story aired on late-night news. Her face appeared, blurred, under the caption. "Heroic evacuation prevents disaster in Sao Paulo commercial building." But while the media celebrated, Clara felt only one thing, fear. The following nights were devoid of rest. She dreamed of flames. Of muffled screams behind iron doors. And in every dream, there was a constant sound, a phone ringing in the background. Non-stop. At work, she avoided talking about the call. But the phone at her station, line 08, would sometimes blink on its own. And when she answered, there was nothing. One early morning, Clara went down to the underground parking lot to smoke. She needed to breathe away from the screens. Leo joined her, even though he didn't smoke. "You've been acting strange, you know." "Strange how?" "Like someone who saw something no one else did." Clara hesitated. Maybe it was time to talk. So she told him everything, the call, the sounds, the feeling of being pulled into another reality. The vision of the fire. The reflection that vanished. Leo listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I don't know if I believe in visions, but I know people who trust instinct more than cameras. And you acted. That says more than any report." Clara took a deep breath. For the first time, she didn't feel crazy. Until he added, "But, what if that was just the beginning?" She stared at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Well, what if you didn't stop the tragedy? What if you just delayed it?" The silence that followed was colder than the concrete beneath their feet. The next morning, Clara saw a report of an unusual accident. Man dies after slipping on a wet post and being hit by a city sanitation truck. She recognized the face of the victim in the small image at the corner of the screen. It was Vinicius. The IT technician. One of the people who had escaped with her. She went to the funeral, still in shock. There she saw Toddy, Melissa, and Leo again. None of them could understand how such a freak accident could kill someone. But Clara felt it. It wasn't random. It was part of something. A sequence. A correction. As if fate was reordering what she had tried to change. She looked at the others. "We escaped, but maybe we weren't supposed to." They all stared at her, stunned. "I think death is coming for us. One by one." Melissa let out a short, nervous laugh. "Are you serious?" Clara didn't answer. She was staring at the door of the funeral hall, where the wind blew harder than usual. For a moment, she thought she heard a phone in the distance. Ringing. Without stopping. Vinicius's funeral was quick, discreet, almost ignored by the media. According to the newspapers, he slipped on a wet sidewalk, fell in front of a truck, and died instantly. For the family, it was a tragedy. For Clara, it was a message. Something led him there. Something pushed him to his death. She couldn't say what, but she knew why. That night, Clara went home and locked every door. She closed the curtains. Turned off her phone. Sat in the dark living room for long minutes, listening to her own heartbeat. Is this really happening? She reread the news about the accident. There was a security camera on the street where Vinicius died. The article didn't show the footage, but the caption described, "The victim appears startled by something off-frame and loses balance." Off-frame. What did he see? Days later, the group that had escaped the fire, now reduced, gathered to talk. Clara, Leo, Melissa, and Toddy met at a remote, nearly empty cafe. This isn't normal. First the call, then the vision, now Vinicius, Clara said in a low voice. You're saying death is killing us one by one? Like in a movie? Toddy crossed her arms, skeptical. Sorry, but that's ridiculous. Melissa remained silent. She stared at her cup of tea without touching it. I used to think it was nonsense too, Leo said. But Clara predicted that fire. That's already too weird to be a coincidence. I didn't predict it. I saw it, Clara said. Like I was inside, dying. I felt everything. Toddy shook her head. You guys are freaking out. It was just an accident. People slip. Clara leaned across the table. What if you're next? The silence that followed was thick as smoke. Even Toddy seemed to flinch. 2 days later, Toddy didn't show up at work. She didn't answer calls. Didn't reply to messages. It was Leo who suggested checking her apartment. Clara hesitated, but went along. Melissa stayed behind, out of fear, maybe, or refusal to be part of it. Toddy's building was old but well located. The doorman let them up. The hallway on her floor was dark. A ceiling light flickered above. Clara felt the same chill she'd felt when she answered the call on line 08. They knocked on the door. No answer. Toddy? It's us, Leo called. Then they heard it. A muffled sound. A steady dripping. Clara pressed her ear to the wood. There was something, leaking. They called for help. Firefighters broke down the door minutes later. The scene was quiet and subtle. Toddy was lying in the bathroom, unconscious, partially submerged in the bathtub water. A hairdryer was floating, still plugged in. The circuit breaker had tripped. But too late. Accident. That's what everyone said. But Clara saw the sequence. She could feel the chain of events unfolding behind the curtain of the obvious. Toddy was taking a bath. The phone rang. She came out, wet, to answer it. There was no one on the line. She went back to the bathroom, annoyed, tripped over the dryer cord on the floor. While trying to dry her hair, the device slipped from her hand. The rest was inevitable. It wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. Death hadn't forgotten them. It was just rearranging the cue. That night, Clara had another dream. She was alone in the call center building. The lights were off. The monitors flickered, randomly, with disjointed numbers. In the background, a phone rang. Clara walked toward the sound, each step echoing like a heartbeat. When she picked up the phone, she heard her own voice whispering, "Melissa is next." She woke up gasping. The digital clock blinked, 4:44. In the morning, she went to Melissa's house. She had to warn her. She had to save her. I don't want to hear this again, Clara, Melissa said, impatient. I haven't been sleeping since Vinicius's funeral. And now Toddy, Melissa, listen. I saw you. In the dream. You're next. There's something, following us. And what do you want me to do? Stop living? Stay locked in my house waiting for death to show up? Maybe yes. That's not living. Clara looked at her. There was something in Melissa's eyes, fear disguised as anger. Just be careful today. Please. Melissa didn't answer. She just closed the door slowly. Clara went home with her mind boiling. Death wasn't a monster with a scythe. It was a sequence of small mistakes. Misplaced objects. Innocent decisions. Everything aligned, perfectly. Like dominoes in a row. And now she knew, she was in the sequence. And the next piece would fall soon. The idea struck Clara like lightning. What if death followed a logic? A pattern? While the city carried on unsuspecting, she buried herself in files, notes, and recordings. She relived every detail of that night at the call center, trying to understand who escaped first, who left last, who had been closest to the flames in her vision. She built a map on her bedroom wall. Center of the fire, Operations Room B. First to evacuate, Leo, Toddy, and Vinicius ran out together. Last to leave. Melissa, paralyzed, was dragged out by Clara. Clara lit a candle and stared at the diagram, as if a pattern might emerge from the darkness. Toddy died after Vinicius. But she got out before him, she murmured. So maybe it was the opposite? A reversed order. If she was right, Melissa would be next. And after that, herself. She went looking for Melissa again. She couldn't let her die. Not again. She found her at work, at the reception desk of the new call center where they'd been transferred. I need to talk to you. Now, Clara said, grabbing her arm. Melissa hesitated, but followed. Her eyes were shadowed with deep circles. She didn't look well. In a nearby cafe, Clara spread out the map, the data, the timelines. She pointed at the board with a trembling finger. You were the last one to leave the building. And the others, they've been dying in that same order. Death is coming back. This is sick, Melissa whispered, eyes wide. You put all this together. It's the only way to understand. If we can figure out who's next, we can stop it. And what if we can't? We can. There was a similar case in Ohio. I found it on an old forum. A school bus. A kid had a vision and saved everyone from an accident. But afterward, all the survivors died, one by one, over the next few months. But he tried to break the pattern. He changed the order. And for a while, it worked. And him? He died too. But later. Melissa let out a weak laugh. What a comfort. Clara gripped her hand tightly. But he bought time. And that might be enough. That night, tension grew between them. Melissa agreed not to go home. She slept on Clara's couch. A silent fear settled between them like a third guest, invisible but present. At 3:13 a.m., Clara awoke to a sound. A drip? No. A ticking. The kitchen clock, which had been dead for days without batteries, was now working perfectly. She stared at it for long minutes. Death is reminding you that time is ticking, she thought. The next day, Clara called Leo. I need you to tell me the exact sequence of how everyone got out of the building. Why? Because we might be reliving the same pattern. And if we repeat the same order of actions as before, it'll keep going. I have to break it. Leo hesitated. Then answered. I left with Vinicius. Then Toddy came out behind us. Melissa was stuck in the break room. You pulled her out. I saw it. Clara wrote everything down. Then, an idea. A crazy one. Leo, do you trust me? I think I do. Meet me at the old building entrance. Tonight. We're going to do something that might change everything. In the dark of night, Clara brought Melissa and Leo to the old call center, now sealed, debris still visible through shattered windows. This is insane, Clara, Leo said. We're going to retrace the steps of the evacuation. But in a different order. Like we're going back in time to tell Death. We messed up. Start over. Melissa hesitated. But for some reason she couldn't explain, she followed Clara into the ruins of the building. Each one walked the path of another. Clara exited where Vinicius had. Leo followed Melissa's route. Melissa copied exactly what Toddy had done. An improvised ritual. A theater of fate. Then, silence. Nothing happened. But Clara felt it. Like a breeze on the back of her neck. Like being watched in the dark. Maybe it worked, she whispered. But as she turned, she saw something strange. In a shard of broken mirror on the ground, her reflection trembled, as if the glass were still vibrating with time. Only hers. The next morning, Melissa didn't show up to work. Clara raced to her apartment, heart pounding. She knocked, shouted. Nothing. She called a locksmith. Forced the door open. Melissa was on the kitchen floor, unconscious. But alive. A gas leak, caused by a broken valve on the stove. If Clara had arrived 30 minutes later. The pattern had been broken. Just barely. Clara dropped to her knees and cried. But deep down, she knew, Death wouldn't give up that easily. She had bought time. But not victory. And now, she was next. The air felt heavy that morning. Clara could feel the weight of responsibility dragging behind her like a shadow with every step. Sitting in front of her laptop, she searched frantically for patterns, stories, reports, anything that could help her understand what was happening. Forgotten forums, old news clippings, anonymous testimonies. It was as if Death had a code, a macabre algorithm she had to decipher. She uncovered chilling accounts. People who had visions, premonitions. Those who had narrowly escaped accidents, only to die later in strange and unexpected ways. A man who survived a building collapse, only to die weeks later from a simple fall in the bathroom. A young woman who avoided being hit by a car, only to become the victim of a freak household accident. It's not just a sequence, Clara thought. It's a cycle. Death doesn't forgive. It just changes its form. Clara shared everything with Melissa and Leo. The three of them spent sleepless nights together at Clara's apartment, building maps, timelines, and theories. If death is inevitable, we need to figure out how to buy time, Clara said. Maybe if we change the order of events, or avoid the places where it waits for us, it'll miss its chance. Leo shook his head, skeptical, but unable to deny the growing fear. We already tried switching the evacuation routes back at the old building, and it barely worked. Melissa nodded. It happened to me. If it weren't for Clara, I'd be dead. They decided to document everything, times, places, nearby people. If death was patient, they had to be faster. A strict routine of alerts and surveillance began. Every move monitored. Every decision pre-planned. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. On a gray morning, the news hit like a punch to the gut: Leo was dead. Not in any ordinary accident. He had stayed up all night caring for his sick sister. While exiting the hospital building, a trash can fell from a high window, crushing him instantly. An improbable sequence, leaving no clues behind. Clara watched the news report with tears in her eyes. Leo's smiling face from a pre-fire party photo looked distant, like a dream. Melissa tried to comfort her, but her own eyes were hollow. How do we fight something that makes no sense? Melissa asked. It's not about sense, Clara replied through gritted teeth. It's about pattern. Tension turned into paranoia. Clara felt watched at every corner, in every shadow. At work, on the street, even inside her home, the silence seemed to whisper threats. Then came the last attempt, to switch places with Melissa. If Melissa ran, maybe death would follow her. Clara accepted the risk. That night, they swapped beds, routines, routes. Melissa went to Clara's apartment. Clara spent the night at her friend's place. Hours later, a muffled scream shattered the silence of the night. Melissa was at the hospital, alive, but badly injured. She had fallen down the fire escape stairs. She had escaped death's full blow, but not its touch. Clara held Melissa's hand, heart aching. "We're close to the end," she said, voice trembling. Melissa only nodded, too exhausted to speak. Death was hunting them, and every second gained felt like one breath less. Clara knew, this wasn't just a race against time. It was a fight against the inevitable. The silence inside the apartment was almost tangible. Only the ticking of the clock broke through it, a silent countdown Clara felt in her chest like a sharp blade. Melissa was hospitalized, stabilized, but far from regaining full consciousness. Leo, who not long ago had been their hope, was gone. Death felt like a long shadow, stretching ever closer, reaching out to take them one by one. Now, only Clara and Melissa remained. Or rather, only Clara. Because Melissa was closer to the end than to salvation. Clara spent hours poring over maps, speaking with doctors, trying to figure out if there was any way to protect Melissa. That's when the idea came: flee the city. Change everything, the setting, the routine, the environment. If death follows a local pattern, maybe by changing everything, it'll get lost, she whispered to herself, clinging to a sliver of hope. The next morning, she packed her things in silence, picked up the phone, and called Melissa. "You're going to the farthest hospital we can find," Clara said. "I'm coming with you." Melissa nodded weakly. In the car, Clara felt the crushing weight of responsibility like never before. The engine purred softly, the road stretched endlessly ahead. For a moment, the silence was deafening, broken only by the radio, where old reports about the fire and recent accidents had resurfaced. In the ambulance following behind, Clara saw something disturbing. In the rearview mirror, her own reflection vanished for a split second. Her chest tightened. A terrifying sensation, like being pulled toward the unknown. "This can't be real," she whispered. But instinct told her otherwise. The following days were a mixture of hope and despair. Melissa was slowly recovering, but Clara felt time slipping away with every breath. She tried everything. Avoiding dangerous places, changing habits, trusting no one. But death was merciless, adapting faster than she could react. Then, on a rainy afternoon, the unexpected struck. While Clara was crossing the street, a simple accident, a car lost control, a collision, a crash. She swerved onto the curb just in time, but in the chaos, she heard the distant screech of ambulance brakes. Her heart pounded. Looking into the car's side mirror, Clara saw her reflection trembling. Like a shadow passed through her image. And then, for an instant, it vanished. She was alone now. The last one. The clock did not stop. The race against time was ending. And in the silence that followed, Clara knew, death always wins. Months had passed since that chaotic night. Clara was far from the city where it all began, trying to rebuild a life that seemed increasingly difficult to reclaim. The morning sun lit up the small apartment, but inside her, the darkness lingered. Silence followed her like an invisible shadow, and echoes of the past crept in through small details: the clink of a glass, the distant sound of sirens, the fleeting glimmer in a rearview mirror. Each sign seemed to whisper the same message. Death never forgets. Clara sat before the bathroom mirror, staring at her exhausted reflection. For a brief moment, her face vanished, just emptiness where her image should have been. She blinked, tense, the air growing heavier around her. The hours dragged by slowly, as if time itself were caught in a trap. That's when it happened, a sharp, unexpected crack sliced through the silence. A muffled sound, barely audible, but it filled the room with a suffocating tension. Clara spun around, heart ablaze. But there was no one there. Or perhaps, there was. Fate, patient and cruel, had finally completed its cycle. Death, silent and relentless, had reached its final victim. And in the emptiness left behind, the world kept turning, utterly indifferent. A whisper echoed in Clara's mind, "The end is not the end. It's only the beginning of eternal silence."